All right, welcome to the NIH Director's Pioneer Award Q&A webinar for RFA RM 25-001. Just to introduce ourselves, we are going to be your panelists for today's webinar. We have with us Dr. Patricia Lebowski, who is the program leader who oversees the High Risk, High Reward Research Program, and she is in the Office of the Director. I'm Becky Miller. I'm also a program leader in the Office of the Director and help manage the program. So we want to introduce you to the Common Fund, which is our office manages this, and it's a really useful resource for you to think about as you go about your research activities. And that's really because, the Common Fund, we create these programs that span the wide mission of the NIH. And at certain points in the program's lifespan, because these typically run from 5 to 10 years, there may be funding opportunities available to you. But there's also other resources that these programs will generate. So it could be data, it could be resources, it could be high-end instrumentation you can have access to, reagents, protocols, all sorts of things. And so I really do recommend that you go to our website at commonfund.nih.gov, take a look at our programs, our current programs, and see if there's anything there that fits with your research area that you may be interested in, and take a look and see if there are some resources available to you. But for today, we are here to talk about one program specifically, and that's the High Risk, High Reward Research Program. So this program, it contains 4 initiatives. It has the NIH Director's Pioneer Award, New Innovator Award, Transformative Research Award, and the Early Independence Award. So this program supports scientists at all career stages who are proposing outstanding, high-risk, high-impact research. We issue annual funding opportunities for these initiatives, and we welcome high-risk, high-impact ideas. We don't require preliminary data or detailed experimental plans for any of these initiatives, and that's because we're asking you to pursue risky research, and we realize that the preliminary data may not be there. All the details of the plan may not be totally fleshed out yet, but what we're really interested in is looking for those really high impact ideas. We also welcome any topic that's relevant to the NIH mission, be it behavioral, social, biomedical, applied, formal science, basic translational, or clinical research. We also encourage applications from all eligible institutions. And before we go any further, I want to thank our working group. This is a list of all the hardworking NIH staff who helped make this program possible. There's a lot of moving parts to this. It's a very complex beast, and these folks all make it possible. And if you look at the end of their names, you can see all these acronyms. I just want to note that we do have representatives from every administering NIH institute and center. So we do have buy-in from all the various components at NIH, and we have their expertise to help guide us and make decisions regarding the program, and we are very grateful for their support. But with that, I'm now going to turn this over to Dr. Lebowski to talk more about the Pioneer Award.
Thanks, Becky. So this award was the first one of the 4 that was set up back in 2004, and it was initiated in response to the observation that NIH was not funding enough high-risk research, that grants were too incremental. So this was set up specifically to fill that niche. So it's an award that supports an individual scientist. We'll get more into criteria as we go through, but it must be an individual scientist with an outstanding record of scientific creativity, and they must be proposing a new pioneering approach to an important challenge in biomedical or behavioral research. So again, it was started back in 2004. It's been around quite a while. It's single PI only. This is not for a team of investigators. You can have collaborators. We'll talk about that, but really you are the PI. Any career stage is welcome to apply. Thinking about the pioneer name, this must be a new research direction. This has to be a change for you, for your lab. So that's a very important research criterion. The application requires 3 letters of reference, and you have to commit a major part of your effort, your research effort, to the award. So more than half for at least the first 3 years. The award budgets are fixed, but you don't need a detailed budget justification. They're fixed at $700,000 per year for 5 years. So this lines up the DP1 with an R01 that you're probably more familiar with, and it shows you the differences. So for a Pioneer DP1, you don't need a specific, you cannot have a specific aims page. Your research strategy is short. It's going to be a 5-page essay, very short, and I'll cover in a minute some of the headings that we want to see you emphasize. Only put in your biosketch, so no key personnel or co-Is. Don't have a separate section for the bibliography. Any references you need, you have to be very sparing with them. They have to fit in the 5-page essay. Again, we don't accept a detailed budget. You just indicate the whole cost of the project. You're not allowed to have a letter of support. You can talk about those collaborations, but you cannot get a letter from those people. Again, research effort, more than half. So it's a major effort for you in your lab. And really different is you need reference letters, and you probably haven't gone out and gathered those in a while. So you need reference letters that can attest to your track record and your creativity. The next slide. So, in general, anytime you apply for an NIH award, your application should follow the instructions in the SF424 guide. So that means that if you're using vertebrate animals, you need to have a vertebrate animal section, human subjects, etc. Now, those documents don't drive the priority scores, but they need to be there. And then reviewers, if you say you're going to use mice and you don't have a vertebrate animal section, that might undermine your credibility a little bit with reviewers. So take the time to develop those and put them in. However, the reviewers will know that you might not have worked out all the details for the whole project yet. The meat of the application, the research strategy, is only 5 pages, and we want you to use the headings that are here on this slide. And of course, this information is in the funding opportunity. You have to explain or choose or describe what your project science area is. And I'll show that on a later slide. It's simply used for review to try to identify the best reviewers for your application. Want a title, should be descriptive. Want a description, why is this scientific topic important? What is the innovative approach you're proposing? Remember that you don't need to have preliminary data, but you can include them if you wish. They're going to be evaluated if you do, but you can put data in if you wish. We tell you that it's a good idea to write it there in the project description that to comply with our funding opportunity, you're not including a detailed or extensive experimental plan. However, the reviewers still have to appreciate that you've thought this through really well, that you have a clear plan, you have alternatives, you know where the risks are, you've identified them, etc. And you're going to pursue this in a robust and rigorous manner. You want to talk about your innovation track record. So yes, you'll have a bio sketch in there as well, but take some space within this 5 pages to talk about your history of innovation. Now, this next bullet is tricky for people. Change in research direction. This is a pioneer. You're going off in a new direction. You need to convince reviewers that it's a change. Oftentimes, this is one of the things that I find almost impossible to describe or to define, but the reviewers don't. They will judge you on whether or not you've convinced them that this is a change in research direction. So take some space to describe that. You want to describe why your project is high risk, high reward rather than suitable for a traditional R01. If it's not, if it's suitable for an R01, you should probably pursue an R01, not the Pioneer. So why? Why is this high risk and why is the reward exceptional? In the beginning, you have to commit more than half of your research effort toward the project. And again, your bibliography or citations have to fit within that 5 pages. So you want to be discerning with those. And you can use a slightly smaller font or, a PubMed IDs or however you want to include them, as long as the reviewers can access them if they need to. So things to think about in the essay. So I'm going to talk about the review process in a moment, but it's very important that you write for reviewers that might be outside your field. In fact, they may be well outside your field. This is very unlike an R01 review session where, those reviewers know the field as well as you, or at least close to as well as you. But these folks might be from a very different scientific discipline. So you have to write for that broad audience. It's up to you, but what we've seen be successful is to begin with a broad description of the field, current state of the art, current gaps or challenges, and then provide context for why is this so innovative and why is the reward going to be so much if the project is successful. Be careful with jargon. You want to ease the reviewer into the jargon of the field, but you don't want it to be a very heavily jargoned and detailed application, or you're going to lose that person outside your field. Again, even though we don't require a detailed experimental plan or preliminary data, you need to convince the reviewers you do have a plan, that you've thought deeply about it, you identify the risk, how are you going to get around that risk, what the alternatives might be if certain approaches don't work, etc. And again, you must convince the reviewer that you're going to attack the project in a robust and rigorous manner. How are you going to validate these new approaches you're developing? If you're going to use animals or humans, how many and why, and include sex as a biological variable if that's appropriate for the project. So this is the review process, and it's a bit different than what you're used to, very different than an R01. So this year, the applications must be received by September 9th, 5 o'clock your time. And they go to CSR, Center for Scientific Review, and they're evaluated for completion. But to start the review, those science area experts, 3 of them are going to be chosen. A little bit more on that on the next slide, but they're going to be chosen to read every application and provide some preliminary critiques. Again, these people will be, I don't call them subject matter experts. They're more like subject matter adjacent experts, but they're sort of close to your area of science. If you make it through to the next step, the phase 2, the editorial panel, they look at the whole list first. They'll review the application, they'll look at the comments from the phase 1 reviewers, and they will draw a line. Usually approximately 25 PIs, applicants, are invited to interview. Okay, so they're the ones that make that decision. And remember, they will not be subject matter experts. So that's why we say you really need to write this for a broad audience. They'll interview candidates, they'll discuss the interview, the application, and score them. That happens January through April. That takes quite a while for them to come up with that final list. And then finally, the required usual second level of review happens with our OD or DPCPC, Council of Councils, usually in May, and that is to review the fairness of the review. So on the next slide, these are the scientific area matches that we ask you to identify in your application. There's only 9 of them. And that's part of why I say that even though they're experts in the area, we consider them a little bit more expert adjacent, right? So, for example, neuroscience, if that's your primary, that's fine, but we all know there's many different sub-disciplines within neuroscience. So again, they might be close, but not really close. So make sure you consider that audience when you're writing. So that phase 1 in a little more detail. As a reminder, you don't need to request a study section. They're all going to be reviewed together in one special emphasis panel, SEP. The SRO, the scientific review officer, who's done this for many years, he's really good at it. He will recruit the mail-in reviewers, and they will read the application and write critiques. Each application gets 3 mail-in reviewers. They're divided up briefly in that 2 of them should be in one of the primary scientific areas that you indicated, and the other reviewer would be in the secondary scientific area. Their focus it's important throughout the whole review, is on these 3 review criteria: significance innovation, your track record of innovation, and importantly, whether or not this is a substantial change in your research direction. That is the one criterion that we see a lot of people have problems with. So make sure you spend some time in your essay discussing that. So phase 2, the editorial panel review. Again, this group of scientists, they're hand-chosen for their broad perspective, and they're going to have very different scientific backgrounds, okay? You're going to have all those 9 areas represented. So again, they'll look at what the phase 1 mail-in reviewers supply, and then they're going to choose approximately 25 individuals to interview. So I duplicated these review criteria for a reason. They're going to use the same exact review criteria. So you're going to be judged by 2 different panels if you make it this far for the same criteria. The SRO will notify you if you're one of the finalists sometime in mid-late March. I don't think they give you a few weeks warning that you will be invited for that interview. So what's the interview? It's a 10-minute presentation by the applicant, you, the PI, alone, no co-PIs or no co-Is or anything like that, remember. It's just you. Then the panel will ask you questions for about 10 minutes, and these are usually things that they've identified as questions by looking over your application. So then after that, they dismiss you and they have a closed panel discussion where they discuss the project and they score it. So here are the four focuses down below. Is that project really going to establish a new paradigm? Does it have transformative potential? It's a very high bar. What's the PI track record look like? Is it exceptionally creative? And key that we've talked about before is that the proposal must really be very different from the questions or the directions that are already being pursued in the field and in the PI's lab. If it's viewed as a logical extension of ongoing projects, it will not fare well in review. So you have to really take your time to make that clear. Okay. And again, just to bullet this out separately, how is an R01 reviewed versus how a Pioneer grant is reviewed? And again, a Pioneer is a 2-phase review, the mail-in and then the panel. And the huge difference is the PI interview. For an R01, you're going to have subject matter experts reviewing your application. For a pioneer, that's not the case. Not only are they not the case, but the panel review, it's almost, I don't want to say it's random, but it's not at all focused on your review, on your scientific expert. The review criteria, they're not, some of them are similar. Significance, innovation is the same. Rigor and feasibility on the approach, yes, but we have a huge emphasis on the innovation of the track record of the PI. And then that kicker, the substantial new research direction. So usually for an R01, the feasibility tends to be the major aspect of review, whereas for a pioneer, we really care much more about the innovation and track record of the applicant. So I think now we're going to take questions that we've been collecting for a while here from you, from your colleagues, from other applicants throughout some time. So yeah, let's answer some questions, Becky.
All right. As we go through this, we're going to bin these questions into different categories. We're going to start with questions about eligibility. All right. Can research faculty, so non-tenure track, be the PI on these projects?
Yeah, so like any R01 equivalent, as long as your institution will submit the application for you, yes, you're eligible in our minds. So you could be non-tenure track, really any career stage, assistant professor, associate, or full professor. That does not matter to us. It might matter to the reviewers, but you're certainly eligible at any stage.
So similar to that, is a postdoctoral researcher on an F1 visa in the US
Mm.
eligible for this funding opportunity?
Right. Well, again, you need to check with your institution. If they're willing and able to submit it for you, then it's fine with us. That's the bar for us. The eligibility bar is whether or not your institution um, says it's okay for you to apply.
How about someone with a master's degree, or do you have to have a PhD or MD?
Well, again, it's the same answer, really. As long as your institution will allow you to apply, you're eligible. I will tell you that you might be at a disadvantage if you don't have a PhD or an MD, though. Yeah.
What does it mean exactly to have a record on creativity? What if this is the first high risk, high reward idea that one has that fits this program?
That's a good question. I mean, innovation, creativity, it's one of those things that's hard to define, right? You know it when you see it, which is very frustrating definition. But innovation is not limited to high risk, high reward. So you're right, there's not many opportunities for scientists to apply for high risk, high reward programs, awards, applications, etc. So it wouldn't be surprising that you might not have done risky science in the past, but you really need to say what was new and different that you did in these previous projects, papers, whatever they are, patents, that were new and different, because that's innovation, right? Novelty is innovation. It's not the same thing as high risk, high reward. Um, so look at it that way and make sure that you articulate the case for the reviewers. You don't leave it up to them to decide.
Right. What is meant by pioneering?
Well, you can think of the pioneers heading off in their wagons on the frontier, or you can think about the fact that it's really a new direction that has not been explored previously. So it's something new and different to you and to the field. It's not just to give the PI, the applicant awardee, support to go off in a direction that's maybe very well hewn, but it's new to you. It has to be new to you and the field. So that would be pioneering.
Does the requirement for a new scientific direction require a new primary scientific area?
Doesn't, it depends. I just showed you a list of 9 scientific areas, and we know that there's more than 9, right? So it depends on how you define a new primary scientific area. I mean, if you're a neuroscientist, it doesn't mean that you need to completely switch your research focus and go into, I don't know, maybe computational biology or something like that. But what it does mean is that it has to be um, different than what you've done previously. Okay. Um, and the important thing to remember is that you may think it's new, but you've got to convince the reviewers that it's new. If they have the impression that it's an obvious extension, oh, of course, this new technology has come online. Of course, they're going to use it to answer the questions their lab has been working on for a decade. That might not be considered pioneering just to bring in a new technology to your lab. You want the questions to be novel too. You want it to be something really new and different that others have not done before either.
Could you talk about the kinds of projects that would be suitable for the Pioneer Award versus the Transformative Research Award?
Oh, that's a good difference. Yeah, we encourage you to have a look at both award programs because they are similar but not the same. The Pioneer, the focus is on you as the applicant. It is very person-centric. A transformative invites a team of researchers. It doesn't have to be a team. It can still be a single applicant, but that's one of the major differences where you cannot have a team of researchers on your DP1. You cannot have co-Is. Um, what other kinds of projects? I mean, the key is that you must be challenging a paradigm. And if your project is successful, if they're not going to transform the field, then it's not a transformative research award. We would also like to see paradigm shifting research done in the Pioneer Award arena, of course, but the review criteria are a little different. You also do not need a change in research direction for the transformative research award. So that might be an important thing to keep in mind. If you do not think that you're changing your research direction, if you don't think you can convince reviewers of that, you might look at the other program. Um, what else? They're reviewed differently. The Transformative Research Award does not include an interview. It's certainly not standard review format, but does not have an interview. It has a discussion at the end with the review panel. I can't think of other differences offhand. Becky, can you think of any others?
The Transformative Research Award has a flexible budget and
Mhm.
effort, percent effort.
Yes, that's a really good point. For the Pioneer, you must contribute 51% of your effort. If you don't have that effort to give, you might consider whether or not it's the right application for you.
All right. Are there special considerations for early stage investigators or new investigators for the Pioneer Award?
No, not for the Pioneer Award. If you are an ESI, I would strongly suggest you have a look at our new Innovator program. Becky went over the 3 in the beginning, right? But it's next door on the web page. You can find it easily. But that one is designed specifically for ESI early stage investigators. Our others, we do not have a different pay line for ESIs or new investigators. No.
Are projects in behavioral and social sciences competitive? Is there a bias in their awarding rate?
Yeah, they're very competitive. We have looked at the ratio of application to award in the various subject areas, and we see no bias. So basically, we make awards in a scientific area in the same ratio in which the applications are received. So if we get, I don't know, 2/3 of the applications are neuroscience, we're going to have a lot more neuroscience awards that year. So, and in some ways, if it's an area that's not well represented in our portfolio, you might actually be an advantage if you can get into the discussion pool. You can read those programmatic priorities in the funding opportunity. It's stated right there that we really need balance in our portfolio. So we're happy to have every kind of science that we can have.
All right. Can you please comment on the new research direction, on how you can have a new research direction, but at the same time show expertise on the topic? For
Mm.
example, does a change in the research area, um, does a change in the research area enough to show a new research direction?
Okay, so again, this is going to be up to the reviewers and up to you to convince the reviewers. But you're right. If it's a brand new research direction, you might not have the expertise in the topic area or perhaps in the technology area. If it's newer technology, you can have collaborators to fill those gaps if you feel that's needed. And that's a good idea because if you say you're going to do, I don't know, again, computational biology on something that you're never done before and you have no experience, no publications on computational biology, that's not going to fare too well in review. So it would be a good idea to either have maybe a little preliminary data or a collaborator on that. Again, you can have collaborators. They cannot provide a letter. They cannot provide a um, biosketch, but you can have them on the application. You just talk about them in the essay. You say, Dr. So and so, who is down the hallway and we meet regularly, will be assisting with whatever it is they're going to be helping you with. They have a vast experience in this area, et cetera, et cetera. But remember, you've got to convince those reviewers. I've seen this go both ways. I've seen reviewers say, this is great, it's a new research area. And then I've seen them say, but they don't have any expertise. How can they make it work? So you need to balance that by bringing in help or by showing a tiny bit of preliminary data. We don't have space for a lot, so that's up to you.
Right. Are smaller institutions or institutions that are not research intensive competitive for the Pioneer Award?
Oh, absolutely, yes. We invite applications from every eligible institution. And again, as a programmatic priority, if you can get into the discussion round and get a score, you actually might be at an advantage. So yes, please apply. You should never feel that you're not eligible or not welcome.
Is the PI's current funding level considered for Pioneer Awards, for instance, similar to NIGMS's policy? If the investigator has more than 2 million in total cost in NIH research project grants, does that affect the chances to receive the DP1?
Yeah, it's another great question. I'll take the second half of that first, the bit about the $2 million cap. That does not impact the chance to receive the DP1. So we do not consider that in our recommendations to make an award. The other question you said is the PI's current funding level considered for the Pioneer Award, similar to like the NIGMS policy. You know, if you have an NIGMS grant, depending on what kind of grant it is, you might want to talk to your program officer, especially if you have an established MIRA award, because sometimes the way overlap is defined is a little different. So you can always apply, but if you get the Pioneer, you might not be able to keep the Mira award. So you want to know that going in if that's going to be a problem or be an obstacle for you. So talk to your program officer on that award and make sure that they're okay with it, or they tell you what would need to happen if you get a Pioneer Award.
What topics are of the highest interest for this award?
We really don't discern by topics. The only thing I can say to that is that we want all topics. So, it might be the case that if you get a score and you have a topic that we haven't supported recently or a lot, that might make it more attractive for an award, right? But really, we want to cover the whole scientific NIH mission. So everything is welcome, and we really want to be able to spread the scientific breadth of the portfolio over the whole mission. So I sort of think that if you're in something that's not as mainstream, you might be in a better position as long as you can get a score.
Right. Does having an R01 impact eligibility?
No, not at all. The key, though, is just to make sure you have that research effort available. It is important, of course, not to have overlapping applications at the same time. So that's not an existing R01, but that would be the only concern I would have. However, because this Pioneer application should be a new research direction, I doubt that you would have an R01 that would be under review at the same time on the same topic, because it's different, right, by definition. Is that what they asked, Becky?
Yeah, yeah.
I feel like I went off a little bit on that, but okay.
Right. Well, if someone if someone's research effort is 80%, is 51% equal to then actually 41% of the total effort?
Okay,
That's a-
so if you have effort responsibilities that are not research. So say you're 20% clinical, making it up. And I think that kind of relates to that question. So you're 80% research and 20% clinical. Yes, we want a little over half of that 80% put toward this award if you get it. So yeah, 51% of 80, I guess it's 41%. So a little more than 40% of your total effort then, but it's a little more, it's 51% of your research effort. Um, yeah.
All right. If an investigator had a DP2, are they eligible for the DP1 within the same area of science?
Oh yeah, for sure. We see that happen. You know, the kicker though is that you must convince the reviewers that there is a change in your research direction. So yes, it can be similar area of science, but the questions you're pursuing are a little different, or the approach is very different, or something to make it still pioneering. But yeah, if you've had a DP2, you're certainly eligible to apply for a DP1.
Since this is a common fund supported award, is there any requirement or recommendation to include common fund initiative data or crosstalk with those programs in your proposed work?
Yeah, no, definitely no requirement at all. I mean, the reason we went over that in the beginning is to let you be aware of those resources in case they're useful, but there's no requirement and there's no advantage to you in the competition, in the review, for including those areas. I think it's just to let you know about them and that they would be good for you, perhaps.
All right. Can previous Pioneer Award recipients apply again? And kind of similar to that, can I resubmit an earlier unsuccessful application?
Okay, so that's two separate questions, right? If you had a Pioneer Award in the past, sure, you can apply again. If you have another new research direction you're taking, absolutely, that'd be great. Um, and can you resubmit an unsuccessful application? Sort of. So you can submit a new application. You don't even have to change one word if you don't want. It could be unsuccessful and you could submit the same exact thing. However, it's a new application. It's not a resubmission. There's no introduction. There's no expectation you would have the same reviewers. You can't mention um, your previous application or the reviews or anything like that. If you do that, it can get thrown out. So yes, you can submit an earlier unsuccessful application, but you can't resubmit it, if that makes sense. However, if it's unsuccessful, I would really encourage you to respond appropriately with the reviews and change the application. Yeah.
What type of publication track record is advised for applicants?
Yeah. So obviously, a strong track record of publications is going to be appreciated and a more positively by the reviewers. What you really want is the evidence that your work has had impact in the field and that it's been creative. So I usually recommend people use some of the space perhaps in their biosketch to when you annotate your publications to keep that in mind, that it will be reviewed by reviewers for impacts and innovation and creativity. So I can't say that you need X number of papers in, certain specific journals. But I think if you don't have a strong publication record, you won't fare as well.
All right. Do pre-existing publications on a research topic preclude consideration of the topic for a DP1, even if they are few and perhaps basic?
That's a tough one. And again, it's going to be up to the reviewers. I've seen applicants publish like an opinion piece, for example, where they might talk about this new research direction. And I've seen some reviewers say, hey, wait a minute, they're already publishing in that area. And the other reviewers say, that's an opinion piece, that doesn't count. So it depends sort of how clued in your reviewers are. Um, I think if you have a major publication in that research direction, that's not going to bode well for you. If you have a tiny little bit of experimental data in your essay, and then by the time you're reviewed, you have a big nature paper on the subject, that's not going to bode well. Remembering that reviewers are not required to go to the web, they're only required to look at what's in front of them in your application. But they're human and they're going to perhaps look a little deeper. So yeah, that would definitely, that nature paper would count against you. It's not often you hear that, but it is the case that if you have major publications in the area, it'll be a hard argument to make that it's new for you.
All right. Is clinical research underrepresented in the program and are clinical applications competitive?
That's a good question too. We do have clinical research in the program for sure. I don't know if it's underrepresented. Again, I refer back to that we make awards in approximately the same ratio in which the applications are received. So if it's underrepresented, it's because we need more applications. It's not that there's any bias. And yes, the clinical applications are competitive. That said, it needs to fit the other review criteria. So if you're applying with a clinical project, but it's not a change in research direction, it won't fare well. But it's because it's not a change. It's not because it's clinical. So I think if you have a project that fits the review criteria, yeah, bring it. That would be great. We'd love to make those awards.
Are foreign investigators allowed to be part of an application with US investigators?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm gonna have to say that we'll have to look at the current NIH policy once an award is to be made, and if there's a subcontract, we'll just have to follow that current policy. The key is to keep very good track of where the funds are being spent. So that could be maybe yes and pencil, but it would have to follow those policies.
All right, so that was the last question for eligibility. So we're now going to move on to questions about the application and submission process. Right, the focus of the DP1 is on the investigator, but high risk, high reward research might require collaboration across disciplines. What is the expected way for investigators to demonstrate access to cross-disciplinary expertise to conduct rigorous research in the essay?
So I think what you're asking is how you talk about collaborations in the essay. It's a short essay, it's only 5 pages. So um, if you know that part of the change in research direction involves new technology that perhaps you don't have expertise with, then you're going to need to have a collaborator. You can't have a letter of support. You cannot include their bio sketch. You simply talk about them in the essay. You might state if you've ever collaborated with them before, or maybe how often you meet and talk. However your relationship, your collaboration has been initiated, however that's built. And then the reviewer is simply going to believe you in that area without a letter of support. That is usually the best way to demonstrate that you're going to have the expertise you need to tackle that rigorously and appropriately.
How many applications are typically received, and in what science areas? What is the success rate?
Because this is a new RFA every year, we're not allowed to reveal how many applications we get. Um, we can tell you that the success rate is pretty low. It's depending on the year and how many applications we receive, it's somewhere in the area of 4 to 6%. It also depends on the availability of funds and how many awards we can make that year, but it's in that range.
Does briefly discussing any preliminary data detract from the idea of the proposal being a new research direction? Does it
Mm.
make the work less novel?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, it's a tricky balance that you have to hit. Um, Again, sometimes a little bit of preliminary data will convince a skeptical reviewer that you have the technology in your lab and you can do it. If the new research direction was to fully develop that technology, then of course that would kind of negate the fact that it's new. If either publish the preliminary data or you include it, that would not convince them that this is a new research area for you if you've already done it. But if there are key elements of the technology that without which you're going to fail, sometimes it's not a bad idea to include a little bit. It could also be a way that you might demonstrate um, the collaboration that you talk about in the essay, that really I am collaborating with this person and we've generated these preliminary data together. It might make it a tiny less novel, but it might make the reviewers understand the feasibility is strong. So there's a balance there, and that's totally up to you where to hit that balance point.
Do successful proposals bridge research areas and topics that have not previously been connected?
Oh, sure. I mean, that's a great way to show that it's a pioneering idea. Maybe I don't know what the difference is between a research area and a topic, but if there are two things that have not been brought together before that you're bringing them together for the first time, that is pioneering. So, yeah, yeah. But sometimes people will bring a new technology into a field where it has never been used before. That might be considered pioneering. Again, it's going to be up to your reviewers.
Right. Preliminary data are not required, but are they expected? What is the balance between not having enough data and having too much?
Yeah, that balance is going to be struck in every reviewer's mind. They are not expected, and we suggest that you state full out that they're not expected due to the policies set forward in the funding opportunity, right? However, as I said, if there's something particularly tricky that would establish feasibility and you want to show it, you can show it. But again, if you have gone too far down that new research direction, it might not be new anymore. Um, if you haven't published in the area, I think it would still be considered new, though. So it's not like an R01 where the approach is really the driving review criteria all the time, right? The score driving criteria, where people have complained that you need to have the work, I don't know what, half, two-thirds done before you can get the grant. No, that's not what we're looking at here. We really want something different, and we will trust the individual that they know how to get it done.
All right, how detailed should the 5-page essay be about experimental plans and collaborations?
Well, it shouldn't, right? We tell you directly you do not need a detailed experimental plan. We don't need, buffers and concentrations and all of that sort of stuff. No. However, it has to be detailed enough that the reviewers can assess how well you've thought it through and what you're going to do. So they really understand your plan. They understand what you might end up with at the end of that plan. And of course, the impact of whatever you end up with, deliverables, discoveries, etc. But I don't think you need to have experimental details. You need to identify the risk. This is high risk, and we're fine with that, but reviewers are going to want to know that you know what is risky and you have a plan to get around it. So I would definitely spend some of that 5 pages identifying risks, talking about alternatives, um, and maybe how collaborations would come into it if needed. The detail of the collaboration, you don't have to say, Dr. So-and-so is going to perform X number of Western blots and X number of transfections in order to, I'm making it up, right? But you would say what skills, what technology, what experience they would bring to the project and how they would contribute.
All right, should the focus in the research strategy be on the set project, or should it be the development of a broad program that will involve various projects
Mm.
as the program evolves?
Oh, I think that's it's just the way you define project versus program, I guess. I think one of the things to think about is you need to be clear that you can accomplish this within that amount of time and within that budget. So, you might talk about things that are a little bit um, ambitious, but you don't want them to think that you haven't thought it through well enough that you know exactly what you can accomplish. So I don't really understand the difference between a broad program with various projects versus a set project. You don't want it to be so focused that you can't describe the impact. Um, but I think they need to understand that you have a plan and that it's going to be a discrete something that's going to be paradigm shifting, whether it's a technology or a concept, it doesn't matter. But um, what would that deliverable be? What would that paradigm shift be? And however you want to cut it up into projects versus programs, that's up to you.
If there are new skill sets needed to execute the proposal, is it sufficient to say that you will have collaborators who are experts in those skills?
Yeah, I think that's how you would say it. I mean, it has to be convincing the way you write it and the way you talk about how that collaborator, how you'd interact. It might be more compelling if you have published in the past, but then it might not be a new research direction. It's trade-off, right? It might be more compelling if they're at the same institution, but then again, maybe not. You just have to describe what the interactions are going to be. Sometimes people will describe, how the collaboration was initiated and why it's also in that person's interest. Why are you guys collaborating on this? Not just to fill a technical gap, but probably because the other person's really interested in the groundbreaking, paradigm shifting question you're asking too. So I would talk about it in an essay format, not in a bulleted list of technologies format. But you have to convince the reviewer either way.
All right. Can I submit 2 applications to this funding opportunity?
No, no, one application per PI. You can have more than one per institution. University of whoever can submit way more than one, but each PI only one.
Can you apply for funding outside the NIH on the same research topic?
Sure. You cannot have 2 NIH applications under review at the same time that are overlapping scientifically, the standard NIH policy. However, if you get that outside the NIH funding, so say if you get a DoD grant on the same area, if you get that grant, then we'll have to look closely if you have a score where you will be likely to get the Pioneer. If they overlap, you won't be able to accept both. So we'll work with program officers after review if that's the case. But you can always apply. Apply, yes.
Can I apply for a Pioneer and other NIH funding opportunities at the same time?
Yes, absolutely. Again, as long as there's not scientific or experimental overlap in the 2 applications under review at the same time. But yes, we have that happen often.
And how often do people apply before receiving the DP1?
I don't think I've ever run an analysis on that. I have seen people that have applied a few times and then finally get it. I've seen plenty of people apply the first time and get it. So that's highly variable. I don't think there's an easy answer for that. 3.7. No, we don't have an answer for that.
Can we email program officials ahead of time to see if the proposed idea meets the criteria for innovation and new direction?
Yeah, sure. The email is there on the slide, pioneerawards@mail.nih.gov, and you'll get me on the other end of that, and that's fine. So I will tell you that as long as it's within the NIH mission, it's fine with respect to the area of science. Now, a program officer is not me, is not going to be able to evaluate the level of innovation in the new direction. But we can talk and I can ask you questions to clarify, and that might help you when you're thinking about how you're writing it. I won't edit anything for you, but I can ask you questions that will make me understand it better and that will hopefully help you articulate it as clearly as possible to a reviewer.
All right, that was the last question for this section. So we're going to move forward onto budget. There aren't a whole lot of budget questions, but there is one asking for how many no-cost extensions are allowed for this award?
Well, currently, you have to ask for a no-cost extension, but I think we would follow the NIH policy at the time. So if this award is to be made, it wouldn't be made until September 2026, and it wouldn't end until 2031. So I don't have a crystal ball to read the no-cost extension policy in 2031, but in general, yes, no-cost extensions are allowed.
Right. And what can these funds be used for?
Well, they can be used for anything that you need them to be used for on the project, right? So you can pay salary. equipment up to a certain level, right? Not only your salary, but salary of folks in your lab. You can have a subcontract to a collaborator if you need it. You can pay for animals, you can pay for associated human subject costs, whatever it is that you need to complete the project.
All right, and the NOFO specifies to enter the proposed project dates of September 30th of 2026, which is the start date, and July 31st of 2031, which is the end date in the application. So will the first year of the award only be for 10 months?
Well, this might vary depending on the institute or center that administers your award. However, no, usually each year of the project is a year, except for the final year is sometimes is going to be shorter because you will have to submit your final progress report and any other documentations that are needed to close out um, within that year. But, by it would be September 30th, again, of 2031, I guess. So you might take a no-cost extension, but still you'd need to do that, right? So we need a little bit of time to do the closeout, and that's why the last year of the award is usually short.
All right.
You can still spend the money, though. That's not a problem as long as you have, everything set up correctly.
All right, somebody asking for a quick budget clarification. So no justification in the budget's required except for the data management and sharing plan.
Correct. Yes.
Right. That's all for budget. So we're going to push forward to letters of reference. All right, do you have any advice on the types of reference writers needed? Should these be people from other institutions? Should they be experts in the field of study for the proposed work? Or should they be people closely familiar with the PI's current work?
Yes. So I think it's I think it's more about who you should not include too. Like you would not include, for example, your chair or the director of research at your institution because you don't want that's so you asked about should they be from other institutions, and that's why I said yes. You don't want it to appear as though the letter writers might benefit in some way if you get the award. So, if your chair writes a letter, they're going to benefit if you get a Pioneer Award. That's going to be, a good thing for them. So that would probably not be the right letter writer. Um, Similarly to collaborators on the current project, right? So if you have collaborators in the past, that's fine. But if they're on the current project, they're going to benefit. They might even have a subcontract if you get this award. So you don't really, they shouldn't be the right ones writing this letter of reference. Reviewers will see that and they won't like that. And then the last question was experts in the field of study for the proposed work. Maybe not. I mean, you might want someone that is an expert in the field of your current work so they can really speak to your track record and your innovation, your creativity. So you might want to balance there. You've got three and only three. You can't have four. You can't have two. So you might want to balance that with someone in that new area of research and someone that knows your past really well. Um, was that all? I think that was the full question, wasn't it? Okay.
Yeah. All right, we're going to have there's lots of different flavors of this question.
Okay.
What constitutes a strong letter of reference for applicants? Like what elements are expected?
Right. Well, you want someone that can speak to you as the PI, your track record of creativity, what you've done in the past, any obstacles you've overcome, um, anything that would make you a strong candidate for the award would be important. Um, yeah.
Okay. And you touched on this a bit already, but like how should the three letters differ? Should they reflect different aspects of the candidate's suitability for the award or reflect how the writer has worked with the candidate?
Yeah, I think it could be either or both, right? I think that you should choose that balance. Like, you don't want all three letters to be focused in the area of the last major project that you completed or discovery or whatever, because then that might look a little flat. You might want someone who has known you for a longer time, and you might want somebody who doesn't know you that well as a person, but knows your work. It's, it's not as straightforward as like with a job letter of reference where you would want your, I don't know, maybe your previous mentor or something like that. It could be a mentor, it doesn't have to be. Um, it's usually not a competitor. I think that would be the only one that might not work too well if it's an antagonistic competitor. But other than that, it really could be from any of those areas you mentioned. I would go for a balance of representing different times in your career and maybe some of the different areas that you've been doing research in.
There's a question asking how the letters of reference are used. Are they used to screen applicants?
They're used by the reviewers. So I don't know what you mean by screen applicants. The reviewers will take them into consideration when they are looking at the review criteria. And usually they're toward the criterion about you as the investigator and your track record of exceptional innovation and creativity. So if that's what's meant by screening, then yeah, sort of.
All right. Can a referee be from a foreign institution?
Yeah, that's fine.
What is the difference between a letter of reference and a letter of support?
Okay, so a letter of support, which is not what you want here for the Pioneer, a letter of support is usually from a collaborator or someone who is bringing a reagent, an expertise, an activity of some sort of way to the project. Yes, I will help the PI with FACS cell screening, and this is the capacity we have, and these are the instrumentation we have, et cetera, et cetera. That's a letter of support. It might touch on, yeah, I think that this PI is really great and the project's fantastic and could be paradigm shifting, but the letter talks about how their effort will support the project and therefore and the PI and therefore it's very different than a letter of reference. The reference letter writers, as I said, should not appear to have a stake in the application. If an award is made, they're not going to benefit. A support letter might be a little different, right? I mean, if you get that grant, then that person providing the support will be able to provide it. It might be for money, it might be for, whatever, but papers or however, just access to the research, but they would benefit as well. So it's very different. The letters of reference does not apply any transactional benefit to the letter writer.
Should the letter writer be professors or are, quote, lower ranks okay? What are the titles of referees for successful applicants?
Yeah, so it could be a mix. I mean, I've seen people have letters from their former mentees, right? Maybe not while they're a student, right? But I've seen that work. And of course, I've seen letters from super famous, amazing people. So it can be a mix, and it really depends on you and your area of research and your track record and what it is that you need to convey. A very well established, I'm not saying old, but a very well established researcher might not have previous mentors around that they can ask to write letters. So it might make more sense that they would have former trainees or collaborators or whatever write for them. It's very individual, I think.
All right, and then just a technical question. When the referees submit their letters through the system, does the PI get a notification that it was submitted?
Yes, yes, that's important. It's important to understand the process of how these letters should be submitted. You, the PI, do not submit them. The letter writer must submit them. They do it through the ERA Commons. They don't need an ERA Commons um, ID or account, but they need yours. So you have to give them the information they need to submit. You give them the link, it's on our website, it's in the funding opportunity. You give them the funding opportunity number, the RM25-001, that's how they're matched up, okay? And then your ERA Commons account, the code name for you. When they submit, you will get an email that says, so and so has submitted a letter of reference for you. It's your responsibility to make sure all three come in before the application due date, so before September 9th. But you can't submit them. They can't give them to you and you submit them for yourself. That's not appropriate. That won't be accepted. So, but if you know that so and so is often late on things, you might want to micromanage them just a titch to get them moving to make sure that they know the due date and they know it has to be in by 5 o'clock, your time, the PI's time, to to be counted. Because if you do not have three letters in, you won't be reviewed.
Yep. All right, so we are going to move on to our last section, which is on review. Let's see. If the Pioneer Award is designed for those with exceptional track records of productivity, how practical is it for someone who is a comparatively early stage investigator with little preliminary data to successfully compete?
Yeah. Again, if you're an ESI and you really have only published a little bit and you're just out of your mentored position, I highly suggest looking at the New Innovator Award, the DP2 award. Again, it's a person-centric award that requires exceptional innovation and a really robust track record of productivity. It does not require a change in research direction, and it is specifically for early stage investigators and individuals within 10 years of their terminal degree or the end of their clinical training. So if that's you, it would probably be best to look at that RFA seriously. You can email and I can talk to you too about the pluses and minuses about that. But um, the New Innovator is crafted specifically for ESIs. It also has a better success rate. So something to think about.
Past reviewers seem quite light on behavioral scientists, and few behavioral science proposals seem to be funded. Is this mechanism a good fit for behavioral science topics that meet the Pioneer Award criteria?
Yeah, thank you for that. Again, the mail-in reviewers, the phase one reviewers, are recruited based on the subject matter areas of the applications that are received. So if we get very few behavioral science applications, proposals, we don't recruit a lot of those reviewers. There's probably a handful in there because that's how many applications we get. If we get more of those, then great, we'll recruit more behavioral science reviewers. Again, I repeat myself, but we fund applications in the science areas in direct proportion to how many are received in that area. So if we are to receive more, we can fund more in that area. They need to be really competitive. They need to convince the reviewers of a change in research direction and innovation in order to get into the final discussion round. We can't do anything with them if they don't get that far. So I would tell you to apply and, really work hard to focus on the review criteria and to try because we'd be thrilled to support awards in that topic area.
All right. Do the scores from phase one, from the male reviewers, do those scores count towards the overall priority score at the end of the phase two interview, or is
Hmm.
priority score determined entirely by the phase two interviews?
Yeah, so yes and no. So the final priority score is the average of the final score that the phase two interviewers, the phase two panelists give you. However, the scores from phase one reviewers, they matter. They count a lot because those are the ones that can get you into phase two, but the numbers are stripped from the application and they're not averaged in to come up with that final priority score. Importantly, the phase two interviewers are the panel is requested to spread the scores a lot, right? So they have access to the full range from 10 to 90, and they really never go to 90, but they can go up into rather high numbers. And that's important for us because we need to be able to distinguish between, the top 25 are all going to be really great. We need to be able to distinguish from really great to really, really great, right? And so that's why the phase one scores are likely to be ones, maybe a two. Um, that's why they're not averaged in with the phase two scores.
Right. How does the interview panel use the comments of phase one reviewers to select candidates to interview, particularly since the three reviewers may give very divergent scores?
That's a good question. If the phase one scores are very divergent, the phase two reviewers will be curious to figure out why. What's the difference and which side do they come down on? So if you have, I'm making this up, two ones and a five, they're going to look at that and say, what's going on here? And they'll try to reconcile using the review criteria what influenced that divergent score. So they use the comments to understand the numerical scores in more detail. And then again, they need to choose the top 25. It's egregiously competitive. It's really quite competitive. If you have three threes, you're probably not going to fare very well. But if you don't apply, you're not going to fare well either. So I always tell people to, yes, you should try. But yeah, those scores from the male reviewers will matter a lot to the phase two reviewers. They also look at the comments. I often hear in the discussion round, well, I'm not an expert, but the phase one reviewer who is an expert says this. Doesn't mean they're going to believe everything the phase one reviewers say, but they do lean on them pretty heavily, I think.
Of the 25 finalists invited to present, approximately how many of them will be funded?
Well, it depends. Every year is a little different with budget. I would say approximately seven, sometimes eight applications are made into awards.
Are the 3 to 4 review criteria graded on the same 9-point NIH scale?
Yes, yeah. So there's three review criterion, criterias, criteria. There's three, not four. And the reviewers have the full range of scores. Both phase one and phase two reviewers have the full range that they can use.
And do the 3 phase one reviewers become part of the phase two reviewer pool?
No, no, it's a completely different, non-overlapping group of individuals. We have previous review panels on our website. I forget exactly what it's under, but it's over on the left side Becky, you'll know
The
what you click on.
the archive.
Archives, right? And it has every year of review and it has a list of the reviewers. Do not contact them. That's not why their names are there, but it can give you a flavor for who they are and how many there are. And, keep in mind that, as we discussed before, if your project is behavioral science and we didn't get a lot of behavioral science applications that time, you might not see reviewers you think are qualified. They'll be different every year, especially the mail-in reviewers. However, yeah, they'll change. They'll change, and you can't count on the same people being there each year, especially if the SRO changes. Our SRO changed a couple of years ago, and things did change a little bit more than previous years.
Will every application receive some kind of feedback?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If you are not discussed, you get detailed critiques from the phase one, the mail-in reviewers. You won't get scores, but you will get feedback for sure. Yeah.
What should my talk focus on during the interview, the project or my qualifications?
Now, that's a good question. Both. I know that the editorial panel, the phase two reviewers, will come loaded with questions for you. They may have questions for you on the science, or they may have questions on your qualifications to carry out maybe some of the technologies or something like that. So, the best advice is always to practice. Get some of your colleagues that are outside your department that don't know anything about the research, have them read your essay and have them grill you. So I do not, sometimes people will have like this slide deck of extra slides. Well, they'll float to if they feel like it's a science question. That can work, but I think you need to be fluid. You need to be able to just discuss the questions as they come up in a really compelling way. Um, Sometimes I've also heard, the reviewers will ask a question, and frankly, the interviewee doesn't hear the question and sort of goes off and talks about something for a while, but never really answers the question. So make sure that you're really answering the question that they asked, because then I'll see sometimes in the discussion and say, well, I asked them this and they never answered. They talked a lot about whatever technology, but I didn't get an answer to this. And that's not going to be good. So listen very closely. Don't have it in your mind exactly what questions they're going to ask and already have your answers ready. Yeah, there's a little bit of that to be prepared, but make sure you're really listening to what they ask.
Okay. Will subject matter experts be part of the interview panel?
Um, they could be, but it would not be by design. It might well be that some of the people in that editorial panel, the phase two reviewers, might be experts in your area or maybe expert adjacent or something, but it won't be assigned specifically because your application is there.
Will the interviews be in person or virtual?
They have been virtual ever since COVID, and I don't expect that to change. We use a confidential Teams platform so that people cannot pop in uninvited. You'll get a link that you have to be ready at that time. Be careful about time zone differences. Make sure that you have it properly and you're ready to go. And I think they usually check and make sure ahead of time that the links are working for you. I'm not involved in that, but I'm pretty sure they do that. But it will be Teams, so make sure that you have access to that. You can do it through, it doesn't have to be the app, it can be an online access as well, but it will be through Teams.
It is challenging to maintain a publication record in a small institute. How do we explain this when the reviewers are asked to look for those with exceptional track record of publications?
Well, I mean, you can talk about your environment, you can talk about the science that you're performing. It's not so much about how many publications, but it's the quality of those publications and any creativity or innovation that you might have shown with those projects in the publications that are more important. Um, if you have a limited amount of effort that you're allowed to give to research, you can talk about that. But I think it'll be more important that they'll see that innovation and that creativity and know that you can turn that innovation and creativity to the project that you're proposing in the application.
All right, I think this will be the last question. If you could summarize your best advice for an applicant, what would it be?
My best advice, your passion for the science comes through when you write about something usually. And if you get to the point of an interview, it makes a huge difference. Um, the excitement that you feel about the project and that you feel the project is going to bring is really important. And I think consider your audience is really, really important for this award, more so than, for an R1 or something. If you cannot communicate the importance, the creativity, the innovation of your project to a broad audience of, really smart scientists, but likely not in your area of science, it probably won't fare that well. So have people outside your field read it. It's only 5 pages. So come on, they can read it. And give you really honest feedback, not just a pat on the back that says, hey, that looks great. Tell them to be brutal. So yeah, I think that's how I would attack it. Yep.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. So that concludes our webinar for the Pioneer Award. Thank you all for watching. We will be posting this recording along with the slides on our website at commonfund.nih.gov/pioneer. But you are welcome to reach out to us if you have additional questions. Please email us at pioneerawards@mail.nih.gov, and we'll be happy to answer them for you. So thank you and good luck.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay.